All right. So, yeah, so this particular topic is not just about counteroffers, but it's going to be about why you should be looking for a job or not looking for a job in the first place. So, a lot of people will decide to look for a position, and when you're interviewing with firms, your reasons for looking for a position are going to have a tremendous amount to do with whether or not you actually get offers to begin with. And then the reasons you're looking for a position are something that are very important to be able to articulate to your current firm if you do potentially get a counter offer, or more likely to try to talk to them about before you even start looking for positions. So let me go into, I do have a PowerPoint to show, but prior to starting this webinar, had some other things that I wanted to include. So I put those together. If you give me 1 second, I will start this. Here we go. And here we go. Okay, sorry, 1 second. Okay. So a counteroffer is a lot more than just a counteroffer. And a counteroffer is really boils down to you get something, you get a counteroffer, but you typically, in order to even leave your firm and to start looking for a position, you need to have very good reasons for looking. And what happens when any law firm is interviewing you, for the most part, if you're currently employed, they're always going to ask you why you're looking. And most attorneys, when they go into interviews, I would say at least 70 or 80% of them give the wrong reasons for looking. And when you give the wrong reasons for looking, if there are multiple applicants for the position, if they're talking to lots of people, more than two or three, the employer is going to hire the person usually that has the best reason for looking. And the best reason for looking typically, and I'm just telling you this from having placed thousands of candidates, watched people get offers and not offers, and go into interviews and do well and go into interviews and not do well. Most of the time when someone doesn't give a good reason for looking, the employer, if they have other people that they're comparing you to, is going to make an offer to the person with the best reasons for looking. So what employers are really looking for, and this is the thing that I've noticed, it's a real commonality among the people that I've worked with that have gotten offers. And typically it has something to do with upward mobility. And what that means is there's some sort of improvement. The employer represents something to you that makes it more likely that you would stay there, that it's the sort of thing that you've been looking for, and the sort of employer that you actually would go there and it fits like a glove, like it's something that fits exactly what you've been looking for. It explains your career trajectory. That employer is the last place you potentially could land based on your current goals. That's ultimately what the employer would likes to hear. And if they hear that, they're actually very enthusiastic because they think you're going to stay. They think you're going to like them. They think that you're going to do what you have to say, have to do, and that sort of thing. But obviously, not every employer is going to get that. But that's ultimately what most people want. So the idea would be even if you're at a mid-sized firm and going to work for a solo practitioner, the solo practitioner is going to think this is great. The person, whatever I'm doing, the person really likes. They want to learn from someone very talented in their practice area, whatever. But the employer wants, that's what an employer ultimately wants. And so what the employer wants is actually very crucial also when you start getting counteroffers. And then the other thing I want to just talk about is anytime you go out on an interview. So this presentation today, and oh, by the way, this is a live presentation. I will be taking live questions and answering as many questions as people have at the end. But the most important thing that I want to just tell you, because if you're going to be looking for a new job, there's really quite a few things that are important, and I'm going to tell you why. And honestly, one of the most important aspects of any job search is having articulated reasons for looking for positions before you actually go out on interviews and even before you start looking for a job. If you have very good reasons articulated and written down and thought of, which I'll talk about right now, then you're much more likely to get jobs. But ultimately, I'll just tell you frankly, the most important reason for looking often is access to work and long-term access to work. So what does that mean? It means you're going someplace that has work, of the type of quality that you have, or they have more work, or they have better work, or they have work that gives you better training, and all sorts of things related to access to work. And then long-term access to work means if I go to this particular firm or employer, do, is it going to give me long-term access to work? Is it going to give me long-term access to work at this employer? Or if I'm going to a major law firm, for example, is that going to give me the ability to move to smaller law firms later? So you really need to think through this most important lesson because that's really the most important reason you should be thinking in the back of your mind. So when you're looking for a position, you have to literally have really good reasons articulated. And some of these you're going to keep to yourself and others you're going to give to the employer when the employer is interviewing you. And anytime you go into an interview, this question is almost always asked, and people give stupid answers and then they don't get jobs. But you really need to understand why you're looking for a job. And why do I bring this up? I bring this up because your reasons need to be they need to be concrete. They need to be good reasons. And in addition to being good reasons, they need to be something that you've thought out because people move jobs all the time. And many times they move jobs for absolutely no reason. They might have a friend at a firm, who knows, or they might just decide that they're bored where they're at and they don't have very good reasons. And so in your career, like you need to make sure that anytime you look for a position, that you're looking for a position for the correct reasons. So here's some of the reasons that you can give. And as far as I'm aware, I haven't, this is extremely important. I haven't seen any articles about this. I haven't written any articles about this. Learning about this today, I hope you take notes, can really, if you learn about these reasons, it should really make a pretty good difference in terms of the quality of your search and how many interviews you're able to make into offers. I mean, it's very important. And believing in these reasons is important. One of the most common reasons for people looking for work is because there's not enough work at their firm. That's a very good reason. And if there's not enough work at your firm, then that means that you don't have any employment security. That means that the law firm is doing something in the market where they're not getting enough work. Maybe they're not doing good work. Maybe they're not marketing enough. But anytime you're at a firm, you need to make sure, or looking for a position, you need to make sure there's enough work. Now, that doesn't mean that there might not be enough work in the short term. But if it doesn't look like there's not going to be enough work, then that's a problem. And so sometimes there's not enough work, not just because of the firm, but because of the structure of the firm. So what will happen a lot of times is as you get more senior at a law firm and you have 7, 8, 9 years of experience, the law firm may stop giving you work because you're too senior in their billing size. That would be an example of not enough work, even though they might have plenty of work for associates. That's something you need to be aware of. And that's something you can often bring up in interviews. There's nothing wrong with telling a firm that there's not enough work and you want to go someplace where you can be busy. That's a good reason. And so not enough work is typically one of the best reasons you can give when there's not other good reasons you can give. One of the most crucial reasons also for looking for a position is if you don't have a good brand at your current law firm. So people get bad brands all the time. You may have upset a partner that you were working with. You may have done something stupid and word got around about it. You may have made a mistake, I don't know, Christmas party or whatever. But people can get bad brands. They can make big legal mistakes that hurt clients that the firm has to cover up. They can do all sorts of things, but they might have a bad brand. And if you get a bad brand, then that is a good reason to leave. You can try to stick it out and repair your brand, but many times people will leave when they get a bad brand. One of the things that's interesting is that in a lot of large law firms, associates and stuff will end up having their first couple years, they'll have some rough patches and they may not do great work and they may get a lot of negative feedback and reviews. And so it's very common after a few years sometimes for associates to move because they don't feel like their brand is as good as it could be. And that could be a good reason. It's often not a bad reason. But if you get a bad brand at your firm, you've upset people, you've made mistakes, you're worried that you could lose your job if people are losing jobs, and that's actually a very good reason to leave. It's not something you should tell an employer, but if you do get a bad brand, then there's really no sense in trying to use a counteroffer as leverage or something. You should really probably look for a new job. So that's a very good reason. Many times it may not be the sort of work you want or you feel is going to benefit you and your career in the long term. So you may want to be more specialized within your practice area. For example, in corporate, you've got all these sub-practice areas. You've got corporate general, but then you've got M&A and securities and all these different types of corporate. And so you could say you want to be more specialized in your practice area, which is actually not a bad thing, but you may have to go to a larger firm, or maybe you don't want to be so specialized, or maybe you just want to be in a different practice area. And many people will leave because of that. Or sometimes people that are doing insurance defense want to get into commercial litigation, which is a different practice area, obviously. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you want to get a different type of work, and that's actually something that law firms like to hear when you go into interviews. So that's a good thing. Sometimes, and so the practice area a lot of times is a very good reason, and it's something that if the law firm is doing something different, then you can tell them, or it could be the clients they're working on, all sorts of things. Some other ones are that are very good reasons to give are if there's not enough upward mobility, excuse me, in your firm. What does that mean? That means that there's not, people don't make partner there. It means that whatever you do, it's not probably going to lead to much. It means that associates are let go at different, just all sorts of things, but there's not a clear path for you to improve. Now, these aren't necessarily reasons you might want to give to a law firm, but they are actually very good reasons. I had Canada, it was actually recently, it was in the past month, and he had gotten some past 6 weeks, he had gotten a offer. I got him an offer at a law firm, paying a little bit more than he was making. And he left, actually, a lot more than he was making. I apologize. He was making, I think, $250,000 a year at a law firm in New York. And I got him an offer paying, I think it was 400 maybe, or 425 or something. And he was very happy with it. And he gave notice. And the law firm came back and they offered him more money than 425. I think they offered him 475 and made him a partner. So that was great. One of the reasons he said he was leaving when they talked to him was because opportunity and he said upper mobility and compensation. And so he actually was able to take that and make it into something good. So sometimes when you do this, it works out, but not enough upper mobility is a good one. Working on larger matters can also be a big one. So people will say they want to work on larger clients. If you're moving from a middle market firm to a larger firm, they'd like to hear that. If you work on larger matters, it is a good reason, by the way, for you to look, because often working at larger firms, they have larger budgets. And so that can make a better attorney. You will be given more work. The clients have more money to spend. So if you're working on things with larger budgets, that's actually can be a good thing. And you can get better legal skills. Attorneys that work on large matters, there's a less degree you have to do often for the clients, expect a different quality of work than they might at a smaller or mid-sized firm where the clients are just more budget conscious. Many times people want to work on smaller matters, and that's a good thing. So you could be moving from a large firm to a smaller firm, and you could tell the firm that you're moving to that I want more responsibility. I want to work on smaller matters where I can go to court and I can run transactions or have a bigger role in transactions. So telling people you want to work on smaller matters, smaller law firms like to hear that from people from larger law firms. So that's good. And that can be a very good reason. So if you apply if you're at a large firm, a mid-sized firm, you apply to a larger firm, you tell them when they're interviewing you, I want to work on larger matters. And if you're at a small firm, a middle market firm, and you want to work at a small firm, you tell them I want more responsibility. So you have to learn how to play these different answers to these different questions, but each of those are very good answers. And so if you're giving those answers when you're interviewing, that can be very helpful. And then a couple other points that I think are just worth mentioning. Geographic moves are great. So if you're trying to move to a different area of the country, say you want to be in Colorado or your family is in Portland, anytime you're trying to move to a different market, that actually can be very good as well. Now, most firms, if you're trying to move to a different market outside of the largest firms, which would be in places like New York and that consider that everybody would want to work there, that's how they think. But anytime you're trying to move markets to a different geographic market, it's actually a very good, these are some of the easiest moves. So say you're from Portland and you're working in Chicago. If you apply to firms in Portland, you're probably going to, it's actually often easier to get positions there than it might be if you're applying in Chicago because the firms in Portland assume you're coming home. That's connotes stability. And it also gives them the idea that you're likely to stay if you go there because you have family there and stuff. So those are good reasons. Sometimes, so giving those reasons in an interview, if you're applying to firms in different cities and markets, they like to hear. And sometimes I've seen people say, I want to go to Colorado because I like the outdoors, and that those kind of reasons can actually work. So you can just have to, but usually you have to be a lot more specific than that. But you have gone to school there, you have a lot of friends there, you've got a lot of family there, things like that. But geography can be a good one. Other things and reasons to move that you don't necessarily need to tell an employer about, but I think that are very important are things if you don't like the policies of the firm. So sometimes people don't like working remotely. Sometimes people do want to work remotely. So talking about those sorts of policies, you probably don't want to do that in an interview unless you know exactly what that firm does. But if you do know what that firm does, then if they work remotely and you say, I want to work remotely more, I'm more productive when I'm at home, those can be good reasons as well. But you have to know what the employer does before you go in there. Sometimes you can give salary and bonus as a reason. Being very poorly compensated compared to what another firm compensates at, if you know that compensation, can be a very good reason as well to give. You can say that the salaries are below market. You can often say that, but you have to be a little bit careful about that because law firms don't always raise their salaries as quickly as others. You don't know exactly what they're going to be doing. Typically, salary is not always the best reason to give when you're looking for a position because you have to be very careful about that most of the time because salary is something that the law firm you're going to work for may not match the salary of every firm in the market. So then you will always look like someone that could move for salary. And you don't want to look like that. You want to look like someone who's moving for reasons related to getting better work, to more job security, more work, those sorts of things that I've talked about above. One reason I think is actually a very good one, depending on where you live, but Los Angeles is huge. So where I live, it could take 2.5 hours to get to downtown during Los Angeles downtown during rush hour, whereas 30 minutes, if it's not rush hour, but 2.5 hours each way would not be good. So if I wanted to work someplace where there was a better commute, closer in, someplace an hour away, which would be like Century City during rush hour, then that would be something that an employer in Century City would take as a good reason because you want to be closer to the office. I've seen people give that reason all the time. So that could be a good reason. And you tell that to an employer. Another reason to look at other firms would be because the environment seems toxic where you're at, meaning it's not a nice place. Like people are unhappy, partners don't get along, associates don't get along, everyone's closing their door. It's just not a positive place for you to work. And that's a very good reason to leave. People will leave firms all the time for that reason, and they don't give that as a reason for looking, but they will leave firms for those reasons all the time. And then other one I brought up earlier is people are getting laid off at your firm, people are losing jobs, there's no job security. So that can also be a good reason as well. And then another one would be your ability to bring in clients and your ability, then the fact that there's a better culture. And bringing in clients is a very important reason because you could go to sometimes people will move to larger firms because they want to bring in larger types of clients and they need that platform of a larger firm to bring in the kind of clients they want to bring in. I've seen people do that. You could sometimes partners will want to move to another very often. They'll want to move to another firm where there's no conflicts with their clients or where the billing rates are lower so they can hold on to clients better or all these sorts of reasons law firms will give, partners will give to bring in clients. And that's very important to bring in clients, to hold on to clients. And then one of the final reasons that I think is also very important is just cultural. So people are different, fit in differently in different cultures. And this is incredibly important. It's something that I think when I started in this business 26 or 27 years ago, I wrote to write articles about various things. And one of the first articles I ever wrote was about firm culture, because firm culture, the culture of the firm that you go to and you're working at is going to determine often how successful you are, how happy you are at work, how you do there, your happiness day to day, your happiness overall with your life. Because if you're surrounded by people that aren't like you, that have different ways of talking, thinking, relating to one another, that is probably not a good thing for you. And then you'll be uncomfortable. And those people won't see you as a peer, those that fits in with them. They'll see you as something completely different and someone that's outside of that. So there'll be less trust and you'll be less likely to advance. And so if you work for people that are like you, then those people will advance you. And it's honestly a culture that you fit in with and the people that you're working with are one of the most important things for where you work, because people protect people that are like them, and then people push out people that aren't like them. And they can give all sorts of reasons. They can say, oh, their work quality was better than yours. That's why they were advanced, or your work wasn't as good, or whatever. But the reasons most often are related to how much people like you. And people don't fire people most of the time that they like. They protect them. People advance people that they like. And so the only way to really head that off is to find a firm with the absolute best culture for you. And I think I can't emphasize how important culture is and why that's a good reason for looking. And so you can articulate that when you go into law firms and talk to people. If you understand their culture, you can understand their culture often by knowing people at that firm or associates or partners and talking to them and what is it like here. And then when you go into interviews, like talking in a way that tells them that's the kind of culture you want to be in. And when they ask you why you want to leave, you say, I haven't been interested in a lot of different places. And so this is why I would be interested in this culture. I want to just back up a second and tell you why I've gone over all these reasons, because this is a presentation ostensibly about counteroffers. So why am I going over all these reasons? I'm going over all these reasons because anytime you're thinking about, anytime you get a counteroffer, you should be in a position where you've gotten a counteroffer because, or you've gotten an offer because of reasons that aren't being met at your current firm. And so if those things aren't being met, most of them are unlikely to change. That's just something to understand. If your brand's bad, if you the geography, obviously, the policies, the salaries, the where you live, the work environment, all these different things are the right reasons for looking for a position. And so if you have those reasons and those reasons are really the reasons, then why would you think a counteroffer is actually going to make a difference? Because a counteroffer is only going to make a difference if something about that can be done and something about that can change. So from an employer's perspective, I just want to go through a few things here. There's some truths. And anytime you get a counteroffer, you're working in a counteroffer, it's everything is suspect. And the main thing I want you to understand, and that you should always understand, once you're in a position where you give notice, the law firm is always going to consider you a risk. They're going to consider you a risk for them to keep around long term. They're going to believe that you're likely to leave in the future, even if you do get a counteroffer, which happens all the time. I can tell you, I've had every single instance in the entire history of my company where I've tried to hold on to someone by giving them a counteroffer to stay. They always quit again. It's usually within 6 months, might be a year, might be less than, it's usually within 6 months. They'll always quit again. So making someone a counteroffer has taught me, and I'm just an individual, that If I do that, then the person's much less likely to stay in the long term. So they're almost always going to leave. And also, they're not loyal. They usually don't talk to me before giving an offer. And I know that I can't trust them. So I'm always thinking in the back of my mind, I need to start looking for other people. And that's exactly what I do. So anytime someone quits, and maybe I have to hold on to them for because if they leave, all this bad stuff's going to happen in terms of whatever. I don't know what would it be, but I'm very dependent on them. I will always start advertising for their replacement and start getting resumes and talk to people I like, even if I don't hire them, because I know that person may quit again. So that's what employers do too. The employer is just giving themselves some time to replace you, and they will start many times interviewing and realizing that you could leave. And sometimes if you do get a counteroffer and they make you a counteroffer and you accept it, you could end up getting fired in the future when they do replace you. And then the final thing is the reasons for leaving, whatever reasons that you gave, most of them are still going to exist. They may make some short-term changes, like they may give you a raise, whatever, but they're only made when you have made a threat to quit and you have something else. So you have to be careful. And what I've seen too is every time someone gets a counteroffer and they will typically become very difficult to manage. They will threaten to quit whenever they don't get what they want. And they will basically be in a position where they're just difficult to manage and they weaken the entire company because someone that is unhappy, that gets a counteroffer, then they will come back the next time something makes them unhappy. They will often start looking for a job again, and they're just unhappy there. And it's not something that I can always control because there's plenty of people that work here, and most of the people, almost all of them, that are happy. But there are people that are unhappy. And then if an employer coddles and gives someone that's unhappy whatever they want, then it undermines the loyalty and the compensation and so forth for other people that are in the company as well. And these are just some of the thoughts that people go through when an employer will go through when they're making you a counteroffer. And we'll talk a little bit about this when I go to the slideshow. But those are some of the most important things I wanted you to understand. And honestly, you have to, if you're looking for a position, I can't, and I'll send this to everyone after the webinar, these reasons for looking. But the reasons for looking are honestly the most important component of your job search. And they're important because they frame your career in a way that you know what you're trying to do. And if you know what you're trying to do and where you want to go, and you have very good reasons for leaving your firm, then that's good. But you should always have good reasons, and these reasons need to be very solid. One of the biggest mistakes that people make. So there are all these external databases. So there's a couple of different ones. We don't necessarily use them because we have our own applicant tracking system we've been developing over 25 years. But when anybody goes into an external database looking for people, and they have attorney ones where you can that recruiters and law firms subscribe to, and it's interesting. All those databases, and this is how recruiters email people out of the blue. It's how employers will often do research. But anytime with these databases, what I think is very interesting is they have these parameters you can add. So say you're searching for a corporate private equity attorney in San Francisco or in the San Francisco area. So you can enter, they'll say, oh, I want them to go to a top 25 law school. I want them to be in an am law firm, or they don't need to be in an am law firm, or they don't need to be at a top 25 law school. But there's always one of the pull down menus it's interesting. It's like, how many years has this person been at this current employer? So you'll pull down, you'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So law firms and other people and recruiters will screen people out that have been there 1 year or less or 2 years or less. And then they'll ask how long. They will be able to also track number of moves. And then there's another pull down menu for number of moves. And so what I'm telling you, so you have how many years at current employer. That's one, many years at current employer. current employer, and then number of moves. So anytime you move, it's a big deal. So because what's happening every time you search for a job and every time you take another job is you're either increasing your long-term marketability, which is a good reason to move, or you're decreasing your long-term marketability. So being able to go to a firm where you think you can stay for as long as possible, or that's going to give you the ability to have better long-term access to work is incredibly important because employers, like recruiters, when they search for people, they may say, I want the person to have been at their last firm for 5 years and zero moves. That's what people want. So your marketability as someone that's been at only one firm in 5 years is probably 5 times more, 10 times more than someone that's been at three firms. So resumes all the time, by the way, are littered with people that I see it all the time. They move every year. Sometimes it's 9 months, 6 months, a year, 18 months. And so people that are moving a lot, you're decreasing your marketability dramatically each time you move. Now, it doesn't mean that you're decreasing in the long term, but if you have multiple moves and you're not able to stick it out at a place, then it's going to often do a lot of damage. So you need to be careful. And honestly, it's often, if you're moving to a larger firm to get better training, it's a great reason. If you're moving to geography for whatever reason, you think you're going to stay there, that's a good reason. And so these were very good reasons to move. And you often do need to move because you've done something wrong at your current employer, but you need by getting a good, bad brand, and maybe it's not your fault, but you do need to be very careful anytime you're looking for a firm, a new position, and you need to make sure you have good reasons. And those good reasons are something that are going to help you in your career. And honestly, something as simple as being closer to the office would give you the ability to be there and have more time at work. Something about working on larger matters would give you the opportunity to have better training. Some not enough work at your firm means not enough employment security. So all these are good reasons, but the employer that you're interviewing with has to believe that your reasons are good. And if they don't, then that's going to hurt you. But more importantly, you need to have good reasons because if you don't have good reasons for moving, then you're playing Russian roulette with your career and you're not really going anywhere and you're not really setting down roots. And then there's one final point I want to make, and then I'll run through this PowerPoint fairly quickly, political capital. But the other huge reason, this is a huge reason, anytime you're at a firm, so say you're an associate and or whatever, partner, it doesn't matter, but you're an associate and you've been at a firm for 7 years and you're doing good work, people like you have a reputation that you've gained even since you were a summer associate of being a team player, of doing good work, of working hard, all these different things. And you've got all these people in the firm, partners and people around you that believe that you do, that support you and think really highly of you. And then all of a sudden you decide that you're going to pick up and go to a different firm and try see what happens there and go to work for a bunch of people and a system and a group of people that you don't know if you can trust, where you don't have a brand and where you're risking a lot. And so you're suddenly giving up all this political capital that's been earned over 7 years that has a lot of value. So it has a lot of value. So if you do good work for people and they like you and you get along with them and they see you and other people have left, but you've committed and stayed there and probably want to advance you. If you give up on your political capital and you just leave it all at your previous firm, that's probably not a smart move. Even if the potential firm you're going to go to is giving you a 20% salary increase or whatever it is, that political capital protects you. And so you've invested someplace, and if you leave, you're going to lose that investment and you'll have to go somewhere and build that up all again. And also, just to be frank with you, the new place may take a while to trust you. It may take a while for you to learn if they like the kind of work you do and if you get along with people, if the culture works for you. So all of that is just extremely important. Understanding your political capital and not losing that, having good reasons for looking, and not having too many moves on your resume. And so that's what happens with counteroffers. And counteroffers, you could potentially not have the reasons that you're going to the new place may not actually be the best reasons at all. Okay, so let me go to PowerPoint for today. Let me see PowerPoint, and I will go through this fairly quickly because I know we've already covered a lot of material. Okay, here we go. All right, counter offers. And I speak with people all the time, and I have attorneys get counter offers and get offers and then ask for counter offers all the time. And what I would just want to make sure you understand is that if you do take a counter offer and you use it, it's often not, obviously, like I told you a little bit ago, it's not obviously the best thing. And law firms will, if you get a counteroffer and you try to use it against them, they're often going to see you differently. And that's something that doesn't change. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. Just give me one second here. Yeah, so I want you to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about the cost and how it's one of the most dangerous career mistakes that you can make when you're looking. Motivations, okay, talked about that, counteroffer situation. A second here. Okay. One other point I also didn't bring up earlier about counteroffers is when you go out and you interview with a firm and you're able to get an offer from them, it's very unlikely that law firm will ever make you an offer again. So if there were things that you liked about the firm that you get an offer from, and then you want to come back to your existing firm and use that as a counteroffer, the firm you got an offer for will be one that often will not, they'll never extend you an offer again. So you have to be very careful. I tell literally almost anytime one of my candidates gets a counteroffer from their firm, I tell them that it's not a good idea. The same problems that happen when you were there are likely to repeat at the next firm. Are likely to come back. They're not going to be fixed. And so you need not to do it. So let me just see here. Yeah, a lot of this PowerPoint I think I've covered. I was going to go over this in a little bit more detail, but I think that I feel pretty good about what we've covered so far. And I don't know that I need to spend a lot of time on this PowerPoint based on what we've talked about. Let me just go through a few things here. What I do is before these presentations, I'll typically look at what I've done before in these PowerPoints. And this is not an old PowerPoint, but it's based on an old talk that I give, and then I update them. And I feel pretty good about the update here today. Just see here. Good. One second, I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. This is not a very long PowerPoint. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much about it. Let me just go here one second back to the document. I don't want to take up more time than I need to of yours if I've already gone over most of these things. But I think just the most important thing I want you to understand is, and again, I will send this out to everyone, but you have to have good reasons for leaving. And once you have those reasons, you need to go back to you need to think very carefully about if those can be fixed anytime you get a counteroffer. And so, how do you fix that? Is a counteroffer going to fix anything? A counteroffer is not going to fix your brand. It's often not going to fix the work. They may say, "Oh, we'll give you the kind of work you want," but generally, they may for the short term, and you usually won't. I've actually seen a lot of situations where people have gotten counteroffers where they tell them they're going to give them the kind of work that they want, and then they don't get the kind of work, and it's often not because of the fault of the firm. Sometimes they just don't have it. So there's that. Okay, we'll take a quick break just for 1 or 2 minutes, and then when we come back, I'll do questions. I will answer questions, anything related to this presentation, or also any questions you may be having about your career. I love the questions part of the weekly webinar because I think it gives people a time to ask questions about anything related to your career, concerns you have, upward advancement, whatever that is, and are things going on, your moves you should make, how you should think about things, your resume, whatever. And so when I come back, I will do questions and I'll be back in just like probably 1.5 minutes, 1 to 2 minutes. Thanks. All right. All right. So we'll go to questions. Give me one second here. I actually might put the questions on this screen that I'm showing because I think, let me just make sure I come back here. Offers. Yeah, because I think this is helpful kind of offer. I usually like to do much longer webinars than this one, but I think that there's not a lot, really much more to be said about this particular topic than what we covered today. And I think that I was able to approach it in a way that's a lot different than the PowerPoints I was going to go over, just because sometimes I'll rethink this stuff before giving these presentations. And I put this together fairly quickly because I thought about it. And I think honestly, the reasons for moving are the most important thing you should think about. I want to send this to everyone too, reasons for moving. Because honestly, this is the reasons you move firms. And this is obviously what I do for my entire, been doing, except for several years practicing in law firms, what I've been doing my entire career. The reasons for moving are the most important question that any law firm will ever ask you when they're interviewing you. And the reasons for moving are also what should be guiding your career decisions. And so many people don't have that aren't thinking through the reasons for moving. They're just moving for moving, or they're not really thinking through what is in my long-term best interest. Like, why am I moving to a certain firm? I had an interesting thing happen, and it's several years ago, but I'll never forget it. I had a candidate, where was he? He was in, yeah, anyway, he had gotten a job in a big law firm in New York, I got him a position in a huge law firm in New York, and he was from Australia, but he had, I don't know, one or a couple years of experience in a New York firm, and then and then lost his job and went back to Australia. And then I was able to get him another position in a major US law firm when he'd been living in Australia for 2 or 3 years. And he hadn't been able to get a job. And for whatever reason, his wife and child were back in New York and he wasn't with them. He was in Australia and couldn't get back there to find a job, but I was able to find him a position in another large law firm. So we got to this large law firm, and he was there for a couple of years and 2 or 3 years, maybe a little bit, I don't know how long it was, 2 or 3 years. And then the law firm, he was senior. So the law firm, this is what they will often do. They'll bring in senior attorneys to do work if they have stuff to do that they are not getting done for whatever reason. And so they brought him in. And then after this 2 or 3 years, they started pushing him out, telling him he had 3 months to look for a job or whatever it was. And so I worked with him to get him more of the same type of position in New York. And I got him some interviews, but not a lot, like maybe two. And then I got him some other interviews. I got him an interview in a firm. He was a securities attorney, and I got him an interview with a firm doing securities law in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is a small market, but they had big clients. Their Steelcase and there's some big companies actually, Kellogg's, I don't know, a lot of big companies in Grand Rapids, and they actually needed a securities attorney like him. And so I got him this interview, and had he gone there, he would have been like the only securities attorney at the firm, would have had long-term access to work, would have fixed this problem of not being able to live in the United States without maybe it wasn't I don't know exactly the situation, but he needed to have a job to stay in the United States. He needed to have a job because he needed to support his family. And I don't know exactly the reason, but he wanted to be in the United States. He needed to be in the United States. I don't know if it was for work permit. I have no idea. But he needed to be in the United States. So he got this interview in this firm in Grand Rapids. And he said, I'm not sure. Why would I want to go to the small town and everything? And it's not a small town. Grand Rapids, Michigan it's not a large town. I mean, it's maybe middle market. It's probably even smaller. But anyway, so he had this opportunity to go someplace where he would have had lots and lots of long-term employment stability, which I think was awesome. It's a nice place to live and work. And he would have been the only securities attorney in a good firm. But he decided not to go on that interview. And then he was senior, meaning he'd been out of school 12 or 13 years or something like that. And then he didn't get any jobs in New York. And then he had to move back to Australia. And as far as I know, he's still there. And then I don't know what exactly happened, but he wasn't working a law firm. And I talked to him a couple of years ago, and he hadn't been back working in the United States for, I don't know, 4 years or something, and his family was there. It's important when anytime you're looking for a position, you always need to ask yourself, like, where do I have the best long-term access to work? Because if you make that mistake, it can be very traumatic to your career. It's just not having long-term access to work is very dangerous. And it's something that destroys so many careers. And what I mean when I say it destroys them, sometimes people will go in house and they'll go in house and they will lose their job in house. And then if you lose your job in house, which is very common after a couple of years, then because companies merge, they go out of business, they downsize, new general counsels come in and want their own people. All these things happen. So if you make a mistake and you go someplace where you lose long-term access to work and going in-house, if it's not a stable place, you could lose long-term access to work. If you go to work for the government, I mean, there's thousands of resumes that I've looked at over the past several months of people that lost their jobs in the US government in Washington, D.C. alone. So if you do that, you could lose access to work. What happens to those careers? If you go to work for the government or you go in-house, it's almost impossible. It's not impossible, but it's extremely difficult. 50 times, 100 times more than if you're in a law firm. So you have to always think about access to work, and that should be reasons that, frankly, having long-term access to work that guide your long-term career decisions. Smaller firms, larger firms, different locations, working with people you like, all these sorts of things should guide that. And then those need to be usually should be in the background of what you're thinking about what's going to give me the most long-term access to work. And it's not always working in a larger firm. It's not always working in a smaller firm. And the thing that's also very interesting that I think is that sometimes people will literally conclude that it's going to be very difficult for me to have long-term and I've seen this happen to very talented people from Stanford Law School, from Harvard, from different law schools. They concluded at some point where they're 1 year out, 5 years out, 10 years out, that if I'm going to have long-term access to work, I need to do this on my own. And I certainly can't do it as a commercial litigation attorney at a giant firm. I'm going to start my own practice doing family law or personal injury. And then they do that so they have long-term access to work. So anything that gives you long-term access to work is important. And your reasons for moving, I would say, need to be related to that. And if they're not, and you don't really, and there's something about those reasons that doesn't necessarily give you that, then that can be very dangerous. So I can't emphasize any of this stuff enough. Long-term access to work. You move in-house, you move to a different law firm, whatever you do, is that going to give you long-term access to work? Because once you run out of work, like your career is in trouble. It's extremely important. Like your career is in trouble once you learn long-term access to work, because what happens is someone that is employable, someone that is employed has a 20 times advantage in the job market compared to the unemployed, because market compared to unemployed. Because if you're unemployed, it can mean a lot of different things. It can mean that you don't want to, that you are not committed. It could mean you got fired. It could mean, sorry, didn't get fired. It could mean all sorts of things, fired, whatever. But it mean all sorts of things. And so why would someone, if you're an employer, you have the choice, someone without these risks, sorry, without these risks, or you. So just think about that if you're an employer. So if you're an employer and you're unemployed, the person's going to think that they have two choices. One is between someone that's committed and someone that's not committed. So this thing that I've just told you about, access to work and the reasons for moving, the access to work is something that if you really understand it and the depth of the statement, then it's going to make a huge difference in how success in your life, because people make this mistake all the time. Like the guy I told you about in Australia, I saw one guy that went in house. He was at Quinn Emanuel, and before that, he'd been in another firm, and he had one of these really good Quinn Emanuel resumes where he'd clerked for a federal circuit judge. He'd gone to whatever, Stanford or something, and done really well there. And then he went to one firm, and then he went to Quinn, and he was 12, 14 years out and decided, or 12 years out, and he decided, hey, I'm going to go in house. He went in house and his job lasted like 9 months, and it took him over 2 years to find another job in a law firm. So he was unemployed for that long and he lost access to work. And other law firms were suspicious of hiring him because he'd chosen to go into a different practice setting. So, anyway, that's some of my thoughts. I'll probably share a few more later, but yeah, I'll start questions now. And just anybody that has questions, you can feel free to ask them and I will answer all of them. Give me one second. Also, I just hate that I can't copy questions. I'm having an issue copying these. Give me a second. Oh, I just wanted to say real briefly that if you're worried about your name showing up in the questions, I always go out and take people's names out before answering them. Give me one second. Apologize. So if you're logged into Zoom, I won't show your name. I mean, sorry, I'm having a little hard time here. Copy. Okay, got it. And I'm just going to stop sharing just one second. I copied all the questions, but I'm going to stop sharing for one second so I can edit out people's names. Second, here we go. I think I've got everyone's name out. Give me one second. All right, we'll go to questions. Yeah, I just really like this topic. I think once you start understanding the reasons for people moving. Okay, let's look at this question. I'll get to some of these other ones later, but I like sometimes the longer ones first. And this looks interesting. So I've done patent prosecution for many years, an electrical engineer. My law firm recently changed the bonus formula, so my overall pay will be 20 to 30% lower this year. I think I would do similar work at many law firms and be successful. My overall pay and benefits are important. I've looked around the internet. I can't find much information about pay and the benefits for law firms. I'm interested in past seminars. I think you've said you should not should you have said you should not ask about pay and benefits during the interview process. It seems like it would likely be very inefficient for me and everyone involved to go through the interview process and wait to get an offer and about the pay and benefits. Do you have any advice? Electrical engineering, even for patent prosecutors, it's not as easy to get jobs as it was several years ago. When I first started in this profession, there were very few people that had electrical engineering degrees and were patent prosecutors, and law firms, there was almost like a bidding war for them, and things have changed. So it's much harder for patent prosecutors like yourself to get positions. So I recommend going out and talking to as many people as you can. I had one candidate that was a patent prosecutor, and he was at a decent firm as a senior patent prosecutor, and I think he was making 200,000 a year or something. And I was amazed. I got a firm that offered. I thought the firm that he got was going to get an offer for was going to pay him 200, maybe 250, and they made him an offer for like over 500. So you just never know. Patent prosecutors are often paid based on you could be paid based on hours. You could be paid on how efficient you are. If you can get a certain patent done, sometimes law firms will charge flat fees to their clients. So if you could get a certain patent done for a certain cost, if you could get two patents done and another person gets one patent done, you might get paid based on the patent. You just never know. So I recommend any interviews you get, you go out on all of them, and because it's not as easy to get a patent prosecution job as it used to be. And because of the way patent prosecution law firms work, there's all sorts of ways that they bill their clients. They bill them on an hourly basis. They sometimes will bill them per patent. They'll just have all these sorts of things, and then they will compensate people differently. Some small firms may give you 50% of the fees they get. Others, just a smaller percentage. They won't pay you that way. They pay you a salary. So if I was a patent prosecutor, I would go out I would go out and take every interview. That would be my advice, even if you think it's inefficient. The other thing too that people don't understand, and this goes for all interviews, regardless of the practice setting that regardless of the practice area, at least the person's patent prosecution, you should go out on all interviews. Every single interview you should go out on, because every single interview teaches you something about the market, like where you're working or where the kind of firm you're working in. It's a networking opportunity, meaning you can network with other law firms and people. And when you network, that's going to give you advantages because you'll come across a lot of those people in your practice later on. Sometimes you can go back to them after an interview and stay in touch with them on LinkedIn. And these can be people that can refer work to you. All sorts of great things happen when you go out on interviews. Every interview is an opportunity also to improve your interview skills. So why wouldn't you want to improve your interview skills if you can? Trying to go out on every interview you get, I think, is very important. Okay. Is it smarter to negotiate directly with my firm instead of bringing in a competing offer to get what I want? Yes. If you feel that there's something you want to change about where you're at, meaning your compensation, your, I don't know, anything about that, you can try to negotiate with your firm directly. Sometimes the atmosphere in law firms is such that negotiation is effectively impossible. So if you're working for like a major US law firm, you obviously can't, as an associate, really negotiate your compensation, for example. You can't you can, some things you can do to negotiate would be asking for more of a certain type of work. That would be one thing. It could be asking for, so what would you negotiate? Let me just go back here to some of the things you could negotiate. There's not a ton. You can't negotiate the firm having more work. You can negotiate the type of work you're getting. That's good. You can't negotiate being a partner in most cases. You can't negotiate the type of work that they have. There's just their policies, their salaries. So most of the stuff that you're talking about here to try to negotiate, it's very difficult too. But you can. That's obviously a very good idea to try to negotiate something if you can with a firm before you leave. But a lot of firms, it just seems it's difficult to negotiate with. And it could, and it's not, but some there are. If you have a very good relationship with partners in your firm and you're an associate, then you can try to negotiate. But in many cases, that's going to be to getting a competing offer is your kind of, I guess, your last chance if you really want to stay there. How do legal recruiters work and who pays them? Legal recruiters they're hired by law firms to find different types of people. So legal recruiters, law firms will contact them with jobs, and then when the law firm contacts them with a job, the recruiter will go out and they'll search their database, and they'll email people and they'll call people, however they do it, and they'll try to find people for those jobs. And then if the law firm hires them, the law firm will pay them in a couple different ways. Sometimes the law firms will retain them. They might pay them like a monthly amount to try to go out and market to people. Other times they'll pay them a flat fee. So they might say, we'll give you $10,000 or 20. Other times most of the time they'll pay them a percentage of the attorney's salary when that attorney is hired. So the first year salary, you should pay a percentage of that salary. And law firms do every law firm doesn't mind paying a legal recruiter because if a legal recruiter finds a really good person for them, then the amount of money that they'll make off the person that they're hiring is usually equivalent to, and the fee, maybe 1 to 2 weeks of the person's salary over the course of a year. So it's very little money for the law firm, all things considered. And that's how legal recruiters work. They work like that in all industries, whether it's tech or whatever the industry is, the legal recruiters, even Hollywood, they work the same. They get paid by, actually Hollywood's a little bit different. The agent charges the actor, for example. But yeah, most law firms use legal recruiters, and the legal recruiters promote jobs too. So there's certain firms that they know will always pay fees if the recruiter hires people. So the recruiting firm will go out and they will advertise jobs. That's like when you're on BCG, that's BCG's essentially trying to find applicants for jobs that are on, that the law firms will pay them to find. And so that's a job. And it's an interesting job. I've been doing it for 25 years and I learned stuff literally every day. It's a lot of fun. It's something you ever thought about doing. It's a great career. And just how fun legal recruiting is and how much people like it. I would say that 90% of the attorneys that I've usually hired, traditionally I hired people that were working in major US law firms to become recruiters at BCGs. They were either at the US, big major US law firm, or maybe they were taking a break to raise kids. I don't know, but for a year or two. But almost every single person that I've ever hired to be a recruiter, and I'm not, you don't need to be from a major law firm to do it, is still doing it. Like 25 years later, almost everyone is still legal recruiting. Or if they're not legal recruiting, they're in HR inside of a law firm, or they're head of a law school's career services. And so it's a fun career. It's legal employment. The like legal employment industry is really the main thing of it. But yeah, it's interesting. It's fun. Okay, what legal jobs can law students get for 1L and 2L summer and after graduation? So in the United States, just in BCG alone, there's 110,000 plus law firms. And this is just law firms, like organized with more than, 10 people or something. It's huge. And then there's smaller firms, there's there's all these different people that you can go to work for. I recommend, if I was a law student, the best long-term career you possibly can have is in a law firm, and this is for everyone. Long-term career is with a law firm, and with sorry, law firm. And the reason that is so is because you can always generate business when you at some point generate business, and then you will have clients that will need you. Sorry, will need you always. So you can do it till you get clients, you get new clients until till you're 80. I've seen people die in the job in their 90s. So you can always, if you work in a law firm, you can always do that. So if I was a law student or graduating, I would do whatever I could to get a job in a law firm. And all you need to do is go to Google or wherever and search for attorneys in different markets and practice areas that you'd like to work for or that you could work for. So if you want to be a real estate attorney, there's hundreds, if not 1,000 plus towns in the state of New York where there's going to be of more than maybe 10,000 people where there's going to be real estate attorneys. And so you can apply to solos, you can apply to, it depends on the quality of law school and but you can apply, there's thousands, tens of thousands of real estate attorneys, probably just in New York State alone, if you wanted to do real estate and transactional. So you apply to attorneys. You apply to attorneys anywhere you possibly can in the practice area you want, and you will get hired. You don't need to, you want, and you will get hired. Sorry, give me a second, we'll get hired. That's it. I'll try to show a quick example here if I can. Let me just open the right screen. And this will help everyone. If you understand what I'm going to show you right now, it can literally change the course of your career and your life. So Google. So let's see here, a list of towns. This is very simple. I want to show this to law students. I want to show this to practicing attorneys. Look at this, list of cities in Los Angeles County. I'm going to do a list of cities I'll just do California, for example, if you're in California, by population. Okay, so here's a list of the largest cities in California. These are the top 100 by population. So I'm pulling that up. Okay, so there's Los Angeles. So let's go down to say, and there's more than 100. When we get to, this is crazy. So if you get to 100, there's 85,000 people there. This is a huge market. It's absolutely Whittier, San Ramon. These are huge, east of San Francisco, Sacramento County. Let's just look at Citrus Heights. I've never even heard of Citrus Heights, but an example would be, and these are the largest. There's probably 500 if you go down to 25,000. I mean, there's so many places, but just go simple search would be real estate attorneys in this Citrus Heights. This is just a small area. And if you do this, you're going to get all these people. Here's Ace California Law. She's sponsoring this and paying for it because she wants to make sure. And then you have Real Estate Law Corporation. I haven't even heard of the city where this is. It's just absolutely crazy how many attorneys there are. It just blows your mind. So how would you get a job here? You would just go and you would send your resume to Sean Dillon, managing partner. It's that easy. And just say, hey, I'm interested in doing real estate law. Would it be possible to come in for an informational interview or whatever it is you want to do? and you can find his email somewhere right on the. And look at all this he's done. This guy, great, someone who'd be really good to train you. So it's that easy. And again, this is 100. So there are thousands and thousands of places that a law student can apply to work. And you need to actually, or any attorney, it's absolutely, to me, insane. Like when I say insane, absolutely insane. And the reason I think it's insane is because there is absolutely no reason for anyone to be unemployed. There's absolutely no reason for a law student not to get a job because in the search I just showed you, let me just make sure. In the search I just showed you for real estate attorneys, there's probably 10,000, I don't know what it'd be, at least thousands. There's probably 30,000 real estate attorneys. I don't know what the number is, but there are solos, there are mid-size, there are small firms, middle-sized firms, middle market firms, whatever. There's so many firms that all you need to do just is review cities and small cities and whatever, middle city, mid cities, small or cities, small, large, whatever. And so if you just review different size cities and then you search for attorneys in those cities and then you send your resume to them, who wouldn't hire you? All they need is people don't send their resume unsolicited to attorneys in smaller markets. It just doesn't happen. They also don't do it to solos and small people. It's in large markets. So there's so many places. That's all you need to do. It's so easy to get a job. It's ridiculous. And if I was a law student, I would just say, and actually, it's so easy to get a job for any attorney. It's ridiculous because there's so many different places in whatever state you're in. So that's what I would do. I don't think it's that difficult at all to get a job. It's actually very easy because someone's going to hire you if they have the work for you to do at a law firm. If I was a 1L, I would probably try to work for free to get something on my resume. Just say, hey, I'm happy to come in. I just want to get experience. I'd like, and that would work. Even if you do it at 2L, I would always recommend if a 1L or 2L wants to work in a law firm post graduation, that even if it's not paid, you should try to take the job. If you're paying $100,000 a year to go to law school and you're able to get a job 2 summers, and then maybe you're not making any money, but it makes your degree like 5 times more valuable because most law firms will hire, your odds of getting hired by another law firm are much better if you work there during the summer. How can a law firm accurately verify a lateral candidate's claim billable hours and productivity before making a hiring decision? So that's a good question. And yeah, that's a good question. I've actually never heard that. So people will do that for partners. They'll ask them, they'll try to verify their business somehow, and they usually can't. And so how can you accurately verify lateral candidates claim billable hours and productivity? I think there's a couple of ways that I would say this is just from talking to people and doing lots of interviews throughout the years. Usually you can tell. So sometimes someone will say something and you won't really feel connected to them, but sometimes you can tell. And typically that way you can tell is how much enthusiasm the person is saying, what their hours are and so forth when they're interviewing you and when you're interviewing them. And it's usually the enthusiasm of the person and being able to pick up on that. And the more enthusiastic the person seems, and the more you connect with them, the more likely it's going to be true. That would be what I would say. I don't know that you can verify that any other way, but that would be how I guess I would think about it. It's just your connection with the person, how much you actually believe them. And most of the time when I've interviewed a lot of people and I've hired people that have ended up being trouble later on. And they weren't probably honest with me when I interviewed them. And usually it's because the reason they're bad news is because when I talk to them, I realize that I don't feel a connection or they don't make eye contact or they don't give a firm handshake or whatever it is, and they don't seem enthusiastic. And so when I see that, those sorts of people have been the kind of people that have filed frivolous lawsuits, that have been bad hires, that have done all these sorts of things. So I think it's usually your connection with a person will help you how much you believe them. The only other thing I would say, this is actually one of the best is, and we talked about this earlier, but how long has the person been at their employer? So if, and that's really, and that actually, I'm glad you asked this question because it's a good question, been at their employer. So the longer someone has been at their employer, the more likely it is that person is what they say they are. So if someone has been at their current employer for for 1 year, that's less likely than 2 years. And if they've been there 3 years or 4 years or 5 years, then it's very likely that what they're saying is true because law firms do not keep around people that aren't working hard and doing a good job. That would be what I would say. And so that's really the biggest test many times is how long the person's been there. How many hours do associates actually work at Big Law? It depends on the law firm. So there are law firms that are Big Law where people are working 1,800 to 2,000 hours. There's ones where people are working a lot more. It typically will also depend on the practice area. So there are certain practice areas in major law firms. I knew a woman once that worked at Skadden. She was actually a recruiter in art law, and that wasn't a super demanding practice area. There weren't lots and lots of hours. There's people that work in trust and estates, tax, employee benefits, and all these different practice areas where there's not as much work. And it also depends on the office you're in. It depends on the practice area. It depends on all these different things. It depends on if you're on cases that go into trials, real estate, commercial litigation. Let me just show you some commercial lit. And it depends on the practice area and depends on the economy. There's just so many factors that go into how many hours you're likely to work at different firms and just so many factors. But I'll just lay this out. So you can't just look at a firm and say, hey, this firm's name is this. I'm going to be working this many hours. It's just you just have no idea. Real estate is often dependent on interest rates. So high interest rates mean less work traditionally, but not always. Interest rates, less work. I'm not going to write this down. Rates, less work, less work. Then you have commercial litigation, which is trial dependent or case dependent. How much work is there for the firm? And sometimes you have cases where there was one law firm, Heller Ehrman, that literally had all this commercial litigation going on. Then these 3 or 4 big cases settled all of a sudden. They didn't have the revenue to pay all their loans. And so they went out of business. They had lines of credit. And it was the firm that had been around since the 1800s and from California. You have corporate, which could be IPO dependent securities. It could be, you could have all these different things happening, M&A. And a lot of times it's economic based. And then you have large law firms have, like I said earlier, they have tax. I'm sorry, give a second. Tax, trust and sorry, employee benefits, all these things where the hours are going to be very stable. It's just you can't actually say how many hours people work at Big Law because it's going to be dependent on the work that's in the office. It's going to be dependent often on the firm's location. It's going to be dependent on your practice area. So you can't just evaluate that or trust in the state. Yeah, that. You can't just evaluate how many hours people are working. And it could be your firm. Some firms have more work than others. Yeah. Okay, I was made an offer. Yeah, I'll send a copy of the PowerPoint too. And if you're ever not sent that, like after a presentation for some reason, just send a reminder to us and we'll always make sure you get it if you didn't get one from last week, for example. Okay, I was made an offer. The offer letter says 165 billable hour minimum. And then during the interview, they said 165 is flexible and then 155 is what expected. Do I ask to update the offer letter to reflect what they told me? Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I would do because they're essentially asking you to work extra 200 hours a year or 180 hours a year. So it's a 180 hour discrepancy, which is a lot. So 150, 108, because 15 times 10, yeah, is 10 months, 150. So it's a 100-hour discrepancy, which is a lot. That's 1 month. That's over 1 month's worth of work. 1 month's worth of work. So absolutely, if someone's pulling a bait and switch like you, like that, or then you should absolutely positively ask for it to be updated if that's the case. And sometimes law firms will lie. So they'll talk to you in the interviews and they will lie. And so you need to be very careful about that. I want a job where I don't have to work until midnight every day. Should I not consider jobs with billable hours? Absolutely not. Most legal jobs, you do not have to work till midnight every day. I don't know why you would think that. It could be, I don't know, but You absolutely do not have to work till midnight every day in most law firm jobs. As a matter of fact, if you get outside of, unless you're on the coast, which would be like California and then New York and New Jersey, and the odds of Texas, big cities, and 95% of firms, 90, maybe 98, 95% plus of law firms do not have that. And why do they not have that? They don't have that because clients aren't willing to pay for it. Most clients are not willing to pay for it. So most clients not willing to pay. Unless it's a large firm with huge clients. Most attorneys do not have to work till midnight every day. That's just not what happens. So billable hours have nothing to do with it. Again, 95% of law firms, you do not have to work till midnight every day. Okay, what does an employer expect when the billable hour is 8 hours per day? It's the expectation that I will be in the office at least 10 hours. How long does it take to bill 8 hours when you include breaks and lunch? I've been an attorney for only 3 years. Okay, so 8 hours a day means 40 hours a week, but they want you in the office 10 hours a day, then you try to make your 10 hours there as productive as possible. I would, if you take a break and you walk into the bathroom, I don't really think that you can define a billable hour however you want. But anytime you're thinking in your mind, maybe thinking about something related to your cases, that should be billable hours. If you drive to the office and you're thinking seriously, strategically about your matter for 20 minutes in the car, I don't see any reason if your mind is working, it's no different than sitting at a desk in front of a computer writing things down. You can dictate notes on your whatever, but I would bill every per second you can to that. And if I was in the office 10 hours a day, I would realistically think that I could probably bill at least 9.5 of that because I would order you walking down to grab some food. Maybe that's not billable, but most of your time is. So I would bill everything I possibly every second I was thinking about a matter. And yeah, and most attorneys will underbill. They will underbill because they won't think about all the time they're billing. And if you go to lunch with another attorney and you're discussing a case, that's billable. Or you're discussing strategy of something, it's billable. Everything you can bill, you should possibly bill. It's dumb not to. Why wouldn't you? So it's up to the people that are submitting the bills when they see your billable hours and what you've told them to write off time that they don't feel accurately reflects it. But I'll be just completely honest with you. Most major, if you're at a big firm or even a middle, whatever, those clients of giant companies, if you're working on behalf of Tesla and you work and one associate bills 250 hours and the other bill's 160 working on the same thing, the one that billed 250, Tesla doesn't care. They're still going to pay the bill and if it's submitted. It's just, I'm not telling you to pad your bills or to lie, but everything you can possibly think of to bill to your client that's related to you thinking about it or working on it somehow you should. So it should be very easy for someone that's expected to be in the office 10 hours a day to build 10 hours. I would just think about how to creatively do it, and you should be able to. It's not that hard, and the client's going to pay as long as the work is related to it. As long as you're not lying and it's not, then the client will pay. So people always, partners, by the way, that are very sophisticated and they figure out ways to come up with high billable hours while still being honest. And so it's just what it is. Should a law student evaluate multiple law firm offers without accidentally harming future relationships or career options? Law firms do not care if they make you, most of the time, if they make you an offer as a law student, you take another offer. You can always go back to them later and say that didn't have any practice experience in the market. How can a law student possibly evaluate what they're looking for in their career? No, I don't think you're harming your relationships with law firms if you, as a law student, if you don't accept an offer. I just don't think that's something that happens. Let's see here. How do we evaluate a law firm before making a lateral move? I think I covered all that. I think it's a good question. But I think that the way you evaluate an offer, any offer, is to make sure what is it going to lead to? Is it going to give you access to work in the long term? And do you have good reasons for moving that are related to that move? Let's see here. Questions. No, I don't think law students or postgraduate offers can be actually, no, not as a law student, but if you are moving, if you have a job or more than one offer after you're graduating, sometimes if it's a smaller law firm, you can negotiate a higher salary or different sorts of things sometimes, but in general, yes, you can. As a summer associate, there's not really much you can negotiate, and you shouldn't. And then your first offer, you certainly can negotiate some of it. But again, the most important thing, I didn't cover this today, but the most important thing for law students, I mean, for young attorneys, and that's 1 to 5 years. Young attorneys, 1 to 5 years out of law school is training. So nothing really matters more than training, and it's more important than your salary. So the training you get will set you up for your entire career. So you need to get the best training you possibly can. And so even if the training is costing you 50,000 a year to go to a smaller firm or whatever it is, that 50,000 is going to that 250,000 you spend could be worth tens of millions in your whole career. What are the risks that law firms face when hiring attorneys who have recently leveraged offers against their current firms? I think the main risk would be that they will do the same thing, your firm. So people that have a history of doing that sort of thing could do it at a new firm. Okay, let me see if I have any additional questions. I'm sure I do. Give me a second. Just copied some initially. What is this? Here we go. Okay, next question is 1,100 hours a year of part-time, and how does that relate to salary? Yes, yes, in most firms, 1,100 hours a year in most legal markets would be considered part-time. But I've seen firms that come out with offers that they say the minimum is 1,200 hours a year. There are firms that do that, and most of them don't. But yeah, I would say 1,100 is part-time. Okay, someone says, I've attended the majority of the weekly webinars and I send emails asking to meet with you. Read my mid-career transition, time set up, and associate then schedule me. The date is then a no-show. Okay. All right, let me copy your information and I'll have someone call you. See here, 1 second. How do I broach the subject of bonuses if it was not discussed during the interview? If you want to know if there's bonuses, yes, you should actually absolutely ask that. There's nothing wrong with asking that question. So that is a good question to ask. Okay, let me see here. And yeah, someone did ask a question, I'm sorry, about wanting to meet with me. And I receive a lot of those. I mean, at least like 10 a day for people wanting to have calls or meetings with me. And I can't respond to those. Otherwise, I'd never be able to run the company. But I am starting in the near future, like a Substack where people can come in and ask questions. And I'll try to do those weekly to do that. I used to do career coaching, but the time was and I still do, but the cost is not something because the value of time that most people want to pay. Or that's even I feel comfortable doing. Yeah, I'll try to provide some more information about a Substack next week. But yeah, I have with 100 plus people trying to get calls to discuss their career each week. It's crazy. I get I'm in LinkedIn all day, and I wish there was more information out there about this kind of stuff. Okay. And generally, I think one of the things I would recommend too is if you have questions about different things related to your legal career, and again, I will meet with people on the Substack, which I'm excited about doing, but one of the best things to do, I think I love the resume workshops because the resume workshops will always enable you to see and understand what you're doing in your resume that could be helpful. But yeah, so someone did leave their information about trying to create a call, and try to make sure I'm better format for answering individual questions about resumes and stuff. Okay, I'm having trouble finding a new position at law firms. It took me a moment to pass the California bar. So I was a law clerk longer than I'd like to. I've had my license for about 1.5 years, but I'm having issues with recruiters finding positions for me that require 2 years or more. Is there anything I can do to beef up my cover letter, showcase my experience? I've worked big law, a decade for over paralegal prior to law school and post. Okay, so lots of people fail the California bar. Lots of people fail 5 times, whatever. So that's, and literally the people that failed it 5 times, if they took it in other states, Pennsylvania, whatever, they probably would have passed on the first attempt. You can obviously see that based on looking at their scores from the multi-state. But so you're saying it's difficult for you with recruiters finding positions for me. You don't need to use a recruiter. As a matter of fact, I would say like recruiters are very useful, but most attorneys do not need a recruiter. You can find positions on your own, and you should also not be looking for positions in a way that is limiting you. So if you're only looking at job listings, that's very limiting because you're competing with everybody else that has a internet connection for the same jobs. If you were a law clerk for 1.5 years after graduating from law school, you don't need to put down your title and your resume. You can just say talk about what you did there and why. And if you don't have your title and they ask about it, that's fine. But you don't need to use a recruiter. If you use a recruiter, if you're not a decent candidate with something very special about you, the recruiter may not, and most recruiters can't help you because they're only recruiting for jobs. And if you don't have the exact experience and you're not the best candidate for the job, there's all these different things that go into it. But you shouldn't be relying, especially if you don't, if the you shouldn't be relying only on recruiters. You should be applying to firms that are in different markets that are in your practice here that are smaller, and you don't need to be, just because you're a paralegal in big law doesn't mean that's where you belong in the long run. Most attorneys are not going to be happy working in all different size firms. It's just not in big law. You don't have to work there. All right. Thanks everyone for being on this call today. I think this was a great call. I'm excited to circulate these questions and answers about counteroffers. But again, the most important point of this webinar today is understanding the most important reasons for moving. So don't move for the wrong reasons. Make sure that you're moving for the correct reasons. And so in order to move for the correct reasons, that means usually having long-term access to work. That's the most important thing. And staying employed is very important. Stay employed, always have access to work. Even if you feel like your job is paying you less money than you could make at another firm, moving for $10,000 or $20,000 if you're risking political capital or you're risking having long-term access to work is not a good idea. And then again, you always need the right reasons for moving. So don't just move to move. Move for primarily reasons are going to be long-term access to work. And I just want to make a couple quick points. So what is long-term access to work? So say you're a seventh-year attorney that should be partnered in a couple years, and you suddenly get an offer. You're at a mid-sized firm making $150,000 a year, or no, let's make it more. You're at a mid-sized firm making $300,000 a year, and you get an offer with a major law firm paying $450,000. Is that a good idea? So it could be a good idea but maybe you're going to make partner at the firm you're at. But is that a good idea? Probably not. So even though you're giving up $150,000 a year, you're going to go to a large firm. If you don't have any business, and they're going to keep you around for a couple of years, and then you're going to have to start over at a firm where you're probably not going to make partner. And so you're going to have to start all the way over, and you're going to lose long-term access to work. And that's not smart. It's just dumb. So even $150,000 a year is not smart if you lose the long-term opportunity for access to work. So that's the thing that people don't realize. Sometimes they go in-house, they think that that's smart, but then they're losing access to work, they're going to work for the government, make all these mistakes that don't take that into account. And then they move for the wrong reasons. There are reasons you should move if you have a bad brand and all these things, but in most cases, those aren't good reasons. All right, thanks everyone for being here today. It's a great topic. I hope it helped everyone, and I will see you next week. Thank you.